Joe Fan here, standing by with the man behind Sports Illustrated's heralded MMQB, Peter King. You've had a chance to be in the war room with John Lynch and company throughout the beginning of this 2017 draft. Just initial impressions of how this regime operates.
It's I'm going to give you, unfortunately, a college word here. I don't want to be too lofty here, but it's kind of an egalitarian draft room. You know, a lot of places you look at it and you sort of know who's in charge, and certainly John Lynch is in charge in that room. But what's very interesting is that Martin Mayhew, Adam Peters, and obviously, a slew of people help Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. And it's very much, from what I noticed, very much a land of equals. And so that impressed me. And it also, I think one of the really interesting things was that it was a little bit strange for me because I know Mike Shanahan very well. I've covered him for 100 years. And I remember Kyle Shanahan when Mike Shanahan was the coach of the Broncos, basically 20 years ago. And Kyle Shanahan would come around when he was in high school, after practice or after school and on Saturdays sometimes. And, Kyle Shanahan, and I said this to him at the draft, I said, this is really an interesting moment for me, having seen you as kind of a young boy hanging around with your dad at the Broncos. And I find what's really interesting is that there was no nervousness or no hey, it's the first time for Kyle Shanahan or John Lynch. They were it's almost like Kyle Shanahan has done this for 20 years. And then you think, well, he's probably been in about 20 draft rooms, with the end of the time with his father, and then when he's been in the NFL, so he knows it. John Lynch was very impressive. He's very much in charge, but you know how sometimes you see people who are in charge and they don't act like it, but everybody in the room knows who's in charge, but they don't have to act like it. So, it was an impressive display, I thought, and everything went more than right for him, obviously.
I think the anatomy of a trade is something that everyone's always curious about, especially at the end of a first round with a division rival up north. What went into that conversation with two guys who were going to see each other twice a year?
I don't think, what is surprising? I've done this 11 times now. I've been in a draft room or around a draft 11 times where I've covered it. And the one thing that's interesting is that you don't really notice teams not calling somebody else, because they're in their division or something like that. That was not the case at all, or because of any specific rivalry. They called Reggie McKenzie 4 or 5 times, with the Raiders, and talking to John Schneider. That was done a lot. And I think what happened in this particular case that made this trade interesting is that they tried to make this trade with about, maybe 20 teams. They kept talking to everybody, starting, around maybe 10 or 12, somewhere around there. But they were talking to every team about what it would take to go up and get that pick. And that's how much they wanted Reuben Foster.
And so when that trade finally comes to fruition, they get Reuben Foster. What was the emotion? Was it relief? Was it celebration? When you try so hard and you get your guy, what were they feeling in there?
It was euphoric. There were 20 hugs in 25 seconds. And there was a lot of hooping and hollering. It was a very interesting scene. It was one of those times that the reason that there was so much euphoria is that when they picked Solomon Thomas early in the round at number 3, there was absolutely no thought, none, that they would have any chance to get Reuben Foster. And they started to think, they went from this amount of hope to this, and oh my gosh, after they get into the mid-20s, they say, look at this, we got a chance to get this guy. And so when you work for something basically for about 3 hours, or 2.5 hours, you basically, the energy release was palpable, and it was quite emotional in the room.
You've now done this 11 times, like you said. So what's the biggest difference between the 49ers draft room with Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch and company, comparatively speaking to what you've seen in past draft rooms?
The biggest difference in this particular one is that I've never been in a draft room where there was as much happening for the full round, for the full first round. But just think of this. They make a trade early and then take Solomon Thomas, and then everybody kind of takes a deep breath, but they get around 10 or 11, and then all of a sudden they're saying, well, let's start trying, to move up to see if we can get Reuben Foster. And they tried and they tried and they tried. So,
and still calm the whole time? I mean,
very calm. Yeah,
even keel?
Yeah, there was nothing. There was no emotion, no anger, no anything. There was just, hey, make that call, see if it happens. But what I find very interesting about it is, in most draft rooms, say for a whole round, there's 3 hours of absolute nothing. There's 3 hours of, hey, what's the meal? What do we have, chicken or meatloaf? And so there's not a lot happening. Everybody's just watching the draft on TV and waiting because all the hay is in the barn, But in this particular case, something kept happening because nobody took Reuben Foster. And that was really the difference. But as far as the difference, there was no real difference. I would just say that what impressed me is that Lynch and Shanahan very much acted like they had been there before, and not just once or twice, like a lot.
Peter, thanks so much for the insight.
Oh, you're welcome, Joe. Appreciate it.